What do you think is actually a good, well-rounded education?
Well, I think education should be about knowledge. You should know more when you leave school than you do when you start at school.
Right, that makes sense. So far I'm with you.
Well, do you know what? You say it makes sense, but it's actually a very controversial thing to say, and I've been challenged upon this so much, because as soon as you say kids should know more when they leave school than they do when they start school, people will say to you, well, what knowledge? Who should decide what it is that children should know? Shouldn't children just be free to explore and to use their imaginations and to develop as individuals? And this idea that you actually teach them something and you actually pick what you think is the best thing that children should know. And this goes for university students as well.
Sure.
Then you become some kind of elitist authoritarian who's imposing white culture or an elitist culture on students.
Right. I didn't realize that education was now an elitist culture, but I think in a lot of respects it is. But you can do both of those things at the same time, right? I mean, you can select what information to teach a child and expand their knowledge, while at the same time not stifling their creativity and ability to be themselves, right? I mean, you don't see those things as mutually exclusive.
No, in fact, I would actually say that the more knowledge you give them, then the more you enable them to be free to use their imaginations and to become creative, thinking, critical individuals, because they've got some basis to form that creativity, to spark that criticality. But the problem nowadays, I think, is that so many people, so many educators, bizarrely enough, think that you can miss out that first stage, that you can miss out teaching people any actual knowledge and just jump straight into the let's be critical, let's be imaginative, let's be creative bit without doing the groundwork first. And I think the more you actually teach people stuff, proper stuff, then the more you enable them to be free-thinking, creative, critical individuals. Yeah. But you know, the bizarre thing as well is that so many people who are involved in education, like I say, they talk the rhetoric of creativity, imagination. Child-centred is the language of the day. You know, everybody's got to be very, very child-centred. And yet when it comes to 2-year-olds, like you're talking about, we can't leave them alone. So, you know, between 2 and 10 or whatever it is, it's like people need to micromanage every step of their day, everything they do. I mean, if I was running a nursery for 2-year-olds, I think I'd have nice toys, big open area, you know, this is for kindergarten kids, and leave them to get on with it, leave them to play, to form friendships, relationships, fall out, fight, take risks.
Which is all that's a type of education. It's not necessarily the quest of knowledge per se at 5 years old, socializing, but socializing is education, right?
It is, but I think the best socializing is done, obviously, you know, you have the relationship with the parents, the relationship with the teachers, but ultimately kids need to be left alone as well. So my daughter's 10. In her school this week, it's anti-bullying week.
Oh, Lord.
And I can guarantee you one thing, the poor teacher next week is going to have so many more kids coming to see him to say that they're being bullied, because essentially what these kids are being taught is that the normal everyday interactions that you have when you're 10, where you're falling out with people, making up with people, that is now bullying.
Yeah.
And instead of just leaving the kids to get on with it, to sort it out for themselves, they're being told, oh no, this is bullying.
Right, and
this
now
is
you have
kind
to
of
tell on them.
Traumatic.
Yeah, you have to sort of tell on them.
Don't
and then
sort it out for yourself, go and tell the teacher. But I think what's changed is that the definition of bullying has gone from being something where we were quite clear about it. If somebody hits you, that was bullying. And you know, if you were being hit badly enough, you could go and tell the teacher, and you would expect an adult to intervene and to tell whoever was hitting you to stop. Suddenly now bullying has gone from being hitting to name calling. Now it's not even name calling, it's leaving someone out. So even if someone doesn't do anything bad to you, they just don't do anything to you.
Yeah.
That is now seen as being bullying as well. Yeah. We use this term snowflake generation, and I think I don't particularly like that term, but you can see how these kids are being then formed in school that nothing bad should ever happen to you. And if something bad does happen to you, it's the end of the world, and there is no way you can be expected to sort it out for yourself. You need to go and get somebody else to come in to sort this out for you.
Yeah.
And you know, the reason why I don't particularly like the term snowflake generation is because it lets older people off the hook. And these kids don't go to school when they're 5 begging for anti-bullying weeks. You know?
Right. It's being given to them by some older snowflakes.
Absolutely, yeah. This is their teachers and their head teachers who are saying we are now going to have anti-bullying week, which I promise you won't be just a week. It will go on the whole year.
Right.
But this is what teachers are doing to them. So the teachers are telling them essentially, you are so fragile, you cannot cope if somebody gives you a slightly odd look.
Yeah.
And you cannot sort that out for yourself and go and say to the person, why are you looking at me in that way? You need to get some help. So they're being conditioned to be scared of everything and everyone and never to be able to sort anything out for themselves. So these are then the kids who are then arriving on the college campus at university 4 or 5 years on from this, completely unable to cope forming relationships with each other. Yeah. I think for me one of the big problems at the moment with education is that the role of the teacher has become so confused with the role of the parents, and I think the job of the parent is to kind of love the kids, obviously, but to do things like teaching them about healthy eating, to bring them up in their values, to teach them about sex and relationships, for example. That should be the job of the parent, and it should be the job of the school to teach kids knowledge, to teach them about works of literature, about maths, geography, history, proper subjects. And the problem is these roles have become completely blurred. So the school is stepping in and teaching sex and relationships education, teaching about consent, teaching about bullying, about friendships, and the parents are being expected to teach the maths and teach the reading. Right. It's utterly bizarre. It shouldn't be the job of the school to tell kids what values to hold. So the teachers are kind of overstepping the mark, I think, but also not doing enough in terms of proper teaching of subject knowledge.
Right. So do you think there's no role for, say, a 7th grade health class where they're not necessarily teaching about sex per se, but they are teaching about STDs or they're teaching about drug use or something like that? You would say that's more of an academic thing, so you are okay with that, or you think that even that... Really?
I wouldn't have any of that at all. I mean, I think obviously there's a case for teaching kids the biology, and that should be done in a science lesson. But as soon as you move beyond the biology, you're putting a values framework into this. So even if you take healthy eating, for example, I do not think it should be the role of the school to teach kids what to eat. Mm-hmm. So I remember my own son when he was about 7, and we'd had a very, very busy week. It was very stressful. I got to Friday, and I'm like, oh, we'll get a pizza for dinner. So no, I can't.
There's gluten in there.
What's wrong with you? Oh no, we didn't have gluten in the UK at that time. Okay. This is a bit more recent.
Well, you had it, but you weren't talking about it.
We weren't talking about it.
Yeah.
But he'd been asked by the school to keep a food diary. This is like a 7-year-old boy who, spent so much time running around. He was so skinny and had been asked to write down everything that he'd had to eat and to kind of colour code it. Green for good, red for bad.
That actually sounds scary to me.
I just think it's completely overstepping the mark. And I'm like, well, come on, I'm your mother. If I want you to eat a pizza, you will eat a pizza, and I don't care how many calories it's got in it.
What kind of bizarro land that is where the mother has to trick the kid into eating a pizza?
I know.
What I mean? That's really...
No. But I mean, I think the healthy eating's one thing, but I think when it comes into sex and relationships, it becomes even more horrible because it is a complete moral agenda that children are being taught, and this then feeds into universities where you have, certainly in the UK, demands for consent classes now. I mean, bizarrely compulsory consent classes, where these classes are mandatory. They must go to learn how to say no.
Right.
Do you know what? These are real dilemmas that I face as a parent because I mean, before Anti-Bullying Week, I promise you, I'm not making this up, but the week before Anti-Bullying Week was, I don't think you'll have this charity here in the US, but we have this charity, NSPCC, which is the National Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children. And the week before Anti-Bullying Week, this charity came into the school to do a week-long series of workshops about sexual abuse with 10-year-olds, and they have this initiative called PANTS, and it's about telling children that nobody should be allowed to touch you inside your underwear. Again, you could say, isn't this perhaps useful for the 1 or 2 children who are being sexually abused? But you take her school, 400 children in it, 395 of them do not need to have lessons in sexual abuse, and it creates worry and concern and fear in those children where they've got nothing to fear about, and it makes them suspicious of their parents. You know, it makes them suspicious of adults who are wanting to help them, and it creates this kind of fear in the heads of young kids. So I get these letters home, you know, this week is Sexual Abuse Prevention Week, this week is Anti-Bullying Week, Healthy Eating Week.
Yeah. Do they have just a regular week?
No,
is there ever just
never.
Sit back and enjoy life week? They don't have that, or we're not going to bother you this week, or
never.
None of that.
I mean, over the years, there's been some really bizarre things. So this was going back a few years now, but the school was into fair trade, and this is when she was like 6. So how can they get 6-year-olds to think about fair trade? So they made posters of bananas and pictures and cutting out and all this kind of thing. But
because
then,
kids, 6-year-olds really understand the international economics.
But this is the thing, because they don't, obviously they don't understand it,
Right.
and there's no pretense of even teaching them about international economics and world trade.
Yeah.
It's just preaching, and it's just values. And so when they draw the poster, they're not expected to think critically about these things. They're expected just to buy into the values and demonstrate having met these values. So they all want pictures of kind of bananas and then farmers saying, I like fair trade, and this kind of thing,
Right.
with no degree of criticality there at all.
Right, and then if you dare criticize it, then...
You haven't demonstrated that you've met the values, so you failed.
When did this happen? When did this stuff really happen? Because as I said before, when I was a kid, I bullied and I was bullied. I remember, you know, that we were allowed to get into fights and all of that stuff, and you try to settle it, you know, between the parents and not make everything national headline. When did this happen, and was it the exact same timing for the United States as it was for Britain?
I think probably quite similar in terms of timing. I mean, I think there's lots of different things going on here. I think you can see, for example, one very, very interesting study shows the geographical distance that children were allowed to go from their home on their own, away from home. And you can see how since the 1970s, year on year, that distance that children are allowed to go has become smaller and smaller. So essentially nowadays, it's pretty much their back garden.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about literally like their ability to get on the bike and ride around the neighborhood.
Absolutely,
Slowly has been scaled
absolutely,
back.
yeah, which is sad, very, very sad. And you can look at kind of high-profile cases, I think, in both the States and in the UK, of children who maybe have been abducted, and how this then spreads a fear through parents, and this idea that we're all kind of monitoring each other all the time. So I let my daughter walk to school on her own, or with another boy from her class. My fear, and this is very, very revealing, my fear was not for 1 second about anything that would happen to my daughter. You know, she's a very sensible girl, she'll be absolutely fine. My fear was, what will other parents think of me? And it's that idea that we're all kind of checking and monitoring each other all the time. And that's really unhealthy. But I think the big
What do some of the parents think of you? As long as we're going that route. I mean, you're public about this. This is what you do.
Oh yeah, she walks to school every day, and everybody drives past and sees her walking to school every day.
Yeah.
You know, people will say funny things to me like, "Oh, you're so lucky. You can do that because your girl's so sensible." Well, actually, no, she's just a regular kid. She's just the same as your child. The reason why she's sensible is because I've allowed her.
Right, it's not a coincidence that you got this sensible kid.
Yeah, it's because I've let her take these risks that she now is this sensible child. But people will come up and they will say, "Oh, I saw her walking to school on her own today," and it's almost as if they just want me to know that they know that she's walking on her own.
Yeah.